Incumbent Len Greer is running for his first full term on the commission. He was appointed in June of 1981 to fill the unexpired term of Pete Matthews. Greer, a graduate of Auburn University with a degree in electrical engineering, served in the Alabama House of Representatives, and he says this experience, along with his engineering background, makes him uniquely qualified to analyze complex rate cases. He says his priority for the next 4 years is to keep utility rates at an affordable level for residential and industrial customers. Commissioner Greer has also proposed a state energy assistance program to help the elderly, poor, and disabled pay their power bills. Greer's primary opponent is Bill Edwards, the former director of the Alabama Coalition Against Hunger. By contrast, Edwards believes power rates for Alabama's industrial users are among the lowest in the nation, and he supports what he calls a moderate increase in the industrial rate. He says the rate structure is unfair to residential customers and is driving small businessmen to bankruptcy. Edwards says if elected, he'd support an overhaul of the electric rate structure and work for the creation of a revolving loan fund from utilities capital to provide the owners of homes, rental units, and small businessmen with low or no interest loans for insulation and weatherization. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
First is the question of
Jim Folsom Jr. wants another term on the Alabama Public Service Commission. He says he thinks his first term on the commission has seen the establishment of a well-qualified staff to represent the public interest, but he says more improvements are needed. Folsom says the commission's rate-making capabilities need improving, and computers can help do that. He also believes that legislation to expand the membership of the commission will lend technical expertise to the commission. One of Folsom's opponents, former PSC staffer Kelly Curington, also advocates legislation, but his idea is to limit the rate-making role of the state Supreme Court. Curington says it's time the legislature does something before utility regulation gets out of the control of the PSC. Curington also wants the commission to investigate the energy cost factor used by Alabama Power Company. The other candidate, Hugh Davis, is a recent law school graduate. He has legislative plans for the Public Service Commission as well. Davis says he's already drafted 2 bills that would give the commission enough power to keep utilities from passing on their advertising costs to the consumers. Davis is also critical of recent delays in an Alabama Power Company rate case, saying present commissioners want to wait to review the case at a more politically opportune time. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
The Newtown Community Center is located on North Decatur Street, which is now closed and undergoing reconstruction. Last week, House of Representatives District 77 candidate Doris Blackshear says some voters might be discouraged from voting because of the road conditions and prevented from voting if it rains. Ms. Blackshear was also critical of the County Commission's reaction to her assessment of the situation. Today, the County Commission members were critical of Ms. Blackshear, saying they were trying to resolve any problems. Most of the Commission members agree, though, that the road conditions warrant changing the voting location. Commission members John Knight and Frank Bray think the road is passable, and they say racial conflicts are partially behind the effort to change the voting location. They want to keep the Newtown Center as the voting location. But Commission Chairman Mac McWhorter wants to move the voting booths to City Hall. Before the Commission voted, the members wanted to call and ask the U.S. Justice Department officials if the change would be approved. But the Justice Department reportedly wouldn't give an answer until the Commission officially took action. On a 3-2 vote, the Commission moved the voting location and is now faced with trying to notify all voters in precinct number 2 of the change and watching for a reaction from the Justice Department. Commissioner Knight says he's considering filing suit over the change. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
The B-1 bomber, a supersonic long-range combat aircraft being built to replace the old standard of the Air Force, the B-52. The B-1 means a $2 billion contract for Rockwell International, the company hired by the government to build the B-1.
Standard industrial classification numbers.
And that could mean a sizable number of dollars for small businesses in the nation. Businesses Rockwell officials say will subcontract about 35% of the work on the B-1. Today, Rockwell officials and some current subcontractors came to Montgomery to meet with about 100 small businessmen from around the state. They're looking for companies to handle metalwork, electronics, hydraulics, and more for the B-1.
For many companies, there may not be a direct opportunity on the B-1, but we may be able to use them on other programs that we may have.
The sponsor of the meeting was U.S. Congressman Bill Dickinson.
Because there's no reason that we cannot do the work or supply what is needed in many, many areas where we've never competed in the past.
Last year, Alabama firms did almost $6 million of subcontract work for Rockwell International. One of the businessmen said this year many small firms hope government contracts like the B-1 can take up slack for the sagging private trade. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
390 units of the housing project built in 1953 will undergo several improvements before the end of the year with money from the Housing and Urban Development Department. Montgomery Housing Authority Board member John Knight says the improvements should make Trenum Court a better place to live.
This project is also going to help a lot of people that live here in the project, because we're insisting that people that live here in the project be a part of the renovation process. The contractor has agreed to hire people out of the project to work. He's also agreed to hire local contractors to work here on the project.
The residents also seem enthusiastic about the renovations.
I think that it would be a much better community. It would be much better for the community in order for the apartment to be more safe for the people in the community.
There are doors and then, smoke alarms for the house. It'd be better, much better for the kids. In case that we be sleeping, and the smoke alarm go off. I think it should be real nice for the project.
In addition to metal front and rear doors, new screen doors are to be installed, new refrigerators, smoke detectors, and better lighting for security. Also, front and rear porches are to be repaired and painted. Mr. Knight says work on Phase 1 should be completed in December, and Phase 2 should begin by the first of the year. In the second phase, better recreational facilities are expected to be installed along with landscaping. Mac Carmack, WSFA TV News.
It's not unusual to see this man's face on a campaign poster or his name on the ballot for the office of State Treasurer. He's Jimmy Passmore, and he's run for the office twice before. But after 2 losses, Passmore says he still doesn't think he'll strike out this time. He's a native Montgomeryan and is the regional credit life manager for the Franklin Life Insurance Company. Passmore says his experience with banks and bankers qualifies him for the office of State Treasurer. Passmore says if he's elected, he'll change the pattern of favoritism that he says has existed in the office for the last 40 years. That favoritism, he says, is giving certain banks more of the state's money because of political ties. Passmore says he has no ties and will be up front with the public, telling which banks have state money and how much is deposited. Passmore says the office is run like an individual's checking account, with the state treasurer signing checks and handing out money. He says if he's elected, it'll be run like a business with profit. This lady is no stranger to Alabama politics. She's Annie Laurie Gunner, the incumbent state treasurer. But Mrs. Gunner is quick to point out that she's not a politician. Instead, Mrs. Gunner says she views herself as a public servant, and she's been serving as the state treasurer since June 1978. Mrs. Gunner was appointed by former Governor George Wallace to fill the post when Melba Till Allen resigned. Mrs. Gunner admits she knew very little about being the state treasurer when she took over the job, but she says over the years she's learned what managing the state's money is all about. Mrs. Gunner says the office is in better shape now than it has ever been, and she lists 4 improvements that she claims credit for. The first is quicker collection of checks, better cooperation with the Revenue Department, collecting withheld state income taxes monthly instead of quarterly, and last, automation of the treasurer's office. But one change, Mrs. Gunner says she'd like to see is more leeway in making investments. Mrs. Gunner says she's running on her record because of what she's accomplished, and she wants another term because she enjoys the work. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News. Insert.
Mr. Dixon and this station said that it appeared to be a smear campaign. It is not intended to be such. Anyone who will look at that ad will know that it is merely the facts and nothing more. I want the voters to have all the information about how Mr. Dixon has done for the consumers. He yells about who supports me. I want him to know that he's endeavored to go get the Black Caucus support. And to me, it's hypocritical to say, oh, Teague is the hand-picked candidate of AEA and ADC, when he in fact has gone and talked with Alvin Holmes and John Knight in an endeavor to get that. And I think the voters ought to know that, that he has done that.
Mrs. Thomason vigorously defended her campaign advertisement's use of the term guilty in reference to a judgment returned against Ron Creel in a civil case. Mrs. Thomason was quick to point out that she's never charged Creel with committing any crime.
But I have said and still say that a jury of his peers, after a trial in which he testified and had a chance to tell his story, awarded a verdict against him of a record size at the time, $1,250,000 total in actual and punitive damages on the theory of fraud in a civil fraud suit.
She says she regrets that the controversy may be obscuring the real issues of the campaign, but she says there's not a thing wrong with her commercials, adding that she's prepared to go to court. After reading Mrs. Thomason's statement, Ron Creel says his attorney will file a libel and slander suit against her tomorrow. Creel indicated the suit would most likely be filed in Baldwin County Circuit Court. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
And I hope and trust that
took more than $15,000 of the special interest group's money, more than any other state senator in office today. Time when 14.5% of the people in this state are without jobs. Mr. Harrison, despite the need to remove dangerous cancer-causing asbestos from our schools, made no attempt to help local school officials get the funds needed to do the job. At the same time he was turning his back on the school problems, Mr. Harrison, as a member of the Senate Rules Committee, allowed state judges to get a 34% pay raise. This action cost the state $5.7 million. Why didn't he do something then? He shouldn't need re-electing to lower taxes. He's had 4 years and did nothing, or reported facts, not political charge. That our children and their teachers are exposed to this material, they face a risk that may catch up with them tomorrow or 20 years from tomorrow. Why has this danger not been removed from our schools in Montgomery County? Local education officials say they need to lower taxes. He's had 4 years, as I said, or reported facts, not. In 1978, Mr. Harrison ran a so-called tough campaign against special interest. But as the records in the Secretary of State's office indicate, he himself was taking special interest money at the same time. As a matter of fact, Mr. Harrison took more than $15,000 of the special interest group's money, more than any other state senator in office today. This is a breach of faith with the voters of this district.
Generalities with having committed libel and slander on various dates between June the 1st, 1982 and August the 24th, Mr. Creel, and requested that he furnish me with a specific listing of any statements that he felt were untrue or should be was found guilty of using slander and fraud. The past several days by Mr. Creel and his attorney has pointed up two very significant things. First, the public has a right to know all the detailed statements. I have repeatedly addressed the constructive issues at stake in this race, and I hope and trust that
The commission voted to switch the voting booths for that district from the Newtown Community Center to City Hall because the road in front of the community center is closed and under construction. But the switch didn't come easily. The two black members of the county commission, John Knight and Frank Bray, fought to keep the voting booths at or near the community center, saying the switch would only confuse the voters. Both commissioners said racial overtones partially motivated the effort to switch the location. But they were outvoted by the other three commissioners who felt the best alternative to the community center would be City Hall. But there's no certainty about City Hall. Before the vote was taken, the commissioners called the U.S. Justice Department to ask which alternatives would be approved. But the commissioners were reportedly told they couldn't get pre-clearance without taking some official vote on an alternative site. Now the commission will wait for any reaction from the Justice Department, and in the meantime, the county will go ahead notifying all voters in precinct number 2 of the change. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
In case it's going to rain, I don't think it'd be passable.
Will help in regard to making it known that the people objected to that location. See what?
Yes. It is due to the problem in the street out there, and in my opinion, if it were to rain, it'd be tough to get in there as it is. Could, but I think it'd be an inconvenience to a lot.
They're only asking for 2 additional temporary workers. Okay.
So this is exactly what we're getting in the posture of doing. I have been out to the Newtown Community Center at this late date. I think that the only thing that this commission and its wisdom can do is try to get with this.
The power company has given all non-union employees, not all employees either, special assignments, temporary special emergency assignments, truck drivers, linemen, helpers, repairmen, that type of thing. And these people will be going into those special assigned jobs tomorrow to make sure that we maintain service to our customers.
What will this walk-off, if it does occur, mean to the average residential customer?
Well, we surely hope that it won't mean anything at all as far as his power is concerned. We hope that we'll be able to keep the power on. And experience in the past has indicated that we have been able to do this.
Mrs. Thomason called reporters together to answer Creel's demand that she publicly retract statements which he says are libelous and slanderous. Not only did Mrs. Thomason decline to retract her statements, she also defended the use of the word guilty in a campaign advertisement referring to a judgment rendered against Creel in a civil court case. Mrs. Thomason says there's nothing wrong with her radio commercials despite what Creel says, and they'll keep running. When asked about a possible lawsuit, Mrs. Thomason said she's prepared to go to court.
I have never charged Mr. Creel with committing any crime and do not do so now. To my knowledge, he has not been indicted for any crime. Please let there be no misunderstanding about that fact.
Mrs. Thomason says she regrets that this controversy may be obscuring the real issues. In response, Ron Creel says his attorney will file a libel and slander suit against Mrs. Thomason tomorrow, most likely in Baldwin County Circuit Court. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
The oil windfall bond issue, which I work for and which we got, provides several $100,000 for Montgomery County and several $100,000 for Elmo County for the maintenance of the public schools. And Elmo County and Montgomery County got way more than their share. Elmo County got $16 million. Divide 67 counties into 450 and it comes out $6 million. But Elmo County got $16 million and Montgomery County got way more than $6 million.
You would have to ask him. I have no earthly idea.
Have you set up a time and meeting?
I'd be delighted to stand right here and debate, but it will be aired this Saturday. country say and go somewhere else to look for those soybeans. My opponent has also said that he wants to get more jobs into this district, but he hasn't said how he's going to do it. I have stated time after time about my blueprint for progress, about trying to work with various segments of the economy and to pulling together a plan for 5 and 10 and 15 years for the economic development of this region. So I have stated my position on some of the things that I think will be meaningful in getting jobs into this district.
Auburn is one of the SEC's mystery teams. There's no question the defense is capable, but can they score? The offensive question marks are many as the season approaches. An untested offensive line will have to mature early with several freshmen figuring in the picture. Nebraska and Tennessee make it a brutal early schedule. Randy Campbell has never faced the pressure of a conference schedule at quarterback. We'll have to find out about that. Lionel James is the only returning ball carrier. Auburn will have to hand the ball to freshman backs early and often. If, as it has been preached all these years, you win with defense, the Tigers have a chance. They have experience, they have ability, they have intensity at almost every defensive position. So Auburn will most likely simplify the offense, try mightily to minimize their mistakes on offense, and wait for the defense to put them in scoring position. This is stop number 4 on the SEC Skywriters Tour. Phil Snow reporting from Auburn, Alabama.
Yes, they are. They are strong on defense. They have probably the whole defense returning. And they averaged about 9 points per game last year on defense, and they're up in the nation as one of the top defensive teams. On offense, they lost some people, but they're still going to be tough. We always say that the teams in the SWAC, they don't rebuild, they just reload in there. So we expect for them to be real tough.
The former Associate Director of the Alabama Cooperative Extension Service, Cecil Davis, says the Office of Commissioner of Agriculture and Industries is the most important office in the state, considering the impact it has on the daily lives of Alabama citizens. The 61-year-old Davis, who grew up on a small Fayette County farm and has risen through the ranks of the Extension Service, feels his background makes him an excellent candidate for the office. A 28-year-old candidate from Gadsden, Jeff Dean, feels that his knowledge of the Department of Agriculture and Industries will be an asset to the people of the state. Dean worked 5 years with the department in the peanut grading division and supervised egg production. Dean says there are some areas of the department that need improvement, but overall he doesn't plan to make any big changes if elected. Jack Folsom, son of former Governor Jim Folsom, is also seeking the commissioner's job. The 32-year-old candidate from Coleman says his first objective, if elected, would be to establish a state-run farmers market. Folsom says the Tennessee-Tom Bigby Waterway is Alabama's ace in the hole to increased industrial and agricultural output. State Senator Albert McDonald of Huntsville would also like to head the commissioner's office. McDonald, who characterized himself as the only legitimate farmer in the race, said he'd like to see an increase in the export of Alabama farm products to foreign countries. McDonald would also like to establish a state-run farmers market in Montgomery and upgrade the consumer protection aspect of the commissioner's office. Montgomery cattleman Bubba Tropman would also like to see Alabama farmers expand their trade in foreign markets. Tropman says the farming industry needs to redirect its goals. The 55-year-old former president of the National Cattlemen's Association says Alabama has become a dumping ground for poor seed, ineffective chemicals, and unproductive breeding stock. Tropman says a commissioner who uses the full authority of his office and carries a big stick can correct the problem. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
Nearly 4,000 Alabama Power Company union employees are set to walk off their job tonight at midnight unless the utility and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers can negotiate a new contract. Contract negotiations broke off last night, and so far, neither side has been able to make a move back to the bargaining table. Tom Foreman of our staff is standing by in downtown Montgomery for this live report. Tom?
The IBEW members represent nearly 40% of the utility's workforce, and they've been negotiating a new contract for several weeks now. The old contract officially expired on August 15th. But a spokesman for the company, Bryant Allen, is standing by with us. What special plans have been made for tonight?
Well, when the union gave us notice yesterday that they would strike at midnight tonight, we always have an emergency operating plan. We implemented the plan and started giving people special assignments and moving people to critical locations to be ready to maintain the system beginning at 12 o'clock tonight.
What does this mean to the average Alabama Power Company customer who has regular service at this time?
Well, we certainly hope that it will not inconvenience any, because our primary emphasis is going to be on restoring service and maintaining service. There may well be some small inconvenience on new service connections, the activities of our Energy Services Department that during home audits, routine maintenance would probably get neglected during this time, because we're going to maintain the service to our customers.
Do you anticipate any problem of some of the people who may not go out on strike refusing to do the work that was struck because of a sympathy strike of sorts?
I really don't anticipate that. There may be a few isolated instances where somebody may have family connections or something and may feel pretty strong about this, but generally speaking, no, I don't anticipate that at all.
Okay, so here at the power company, what is expected is hopefully, as much as possible, business as usual. There will be supervisory personnel and others filling in for the workers if they go out on strike at midnight. Hopefully that will mean no interruption of service, except in certain circumstances, in special circumstances, for most Alabama Power customers. Back to you, Bob.
Thanks very much. Tom Foreman live at Alabama Power in downtown Montgomery. On to
The strikers are at each entrance of area offices and warehouses. They walk only 2 at a time, working 8-hour shifts. And unless a contract is signed today, 2 different union members will be here tomorrow. But so far there are no plans for negotiations to resume. Union officials say the contract offered by Alabama Power is unacceptable, and the union workers will stay off the job until they're satisfied. The last strike by IBEW in 1966 lasted 6 months. Alabama Power officials admit the strike is causing problems, but they promise that service will be maintained.
Some functions of the company may be delayed, such as a new service to a new building that require construction work, and things from our Energy Services Department like home audits. They'll be put off some. We would like to get back and start negotiating and get these people back to work, because we need them back and we want them back.
The latest contract between Alabama Power and the union expired August 15th, but electrical workers stayed on the job, waiting on contract negotiations until midnight. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
We notified our employees that we must cease operations permanently. This is not a temporary thing, it is a permanent closing. And after we've run the plant out, which will take approximately 10 weeks, and during this time we'll attempt diligently to replace our people, place our people in other areas, then we'll shut the doors and sell the plant and the equipment.
A number of the other industrial plants in Greenville are already on a slowdown, working part-time, and everybody's just fearful of losing their jobs. So it's going to have a bad effect on the confidence of other workers around the Greenville area.
I feel like we've just gotten a real good jab in the solar plexus down here in Greenville, and it's the profile of our unemployment is going to jump by at least 2%. That's my understanding from the Alabama Unemployment Service officer, Bob Worland. And it's going to hurt the people more personally in town here than it is the county at large, because these people have lived all their lives right here in Greenville.
Making it known that
we finish that issue back since you do have such short a time.
I certainly hope so. So logistically, it's just no way that we can notify voters that the polling place has changed from Newtown to City Hall when everything has already gone out, cards and everything telling people to vote at the Newtown Community Center.
And I understand that you also sent a telegram to the Justice Department earlier today.
I sent one yesterday to the Justice Department asking them not to pre-clear this latest move by the County Commission to change the polling place from Newtown to City Hall.
Thomas Shea and William Boyington were described by federal prosecutors as the apparent bosses in the smuggling operation. They were the defendants who received the 13-year sentences and $100,000 fines. Their prison term begins today. The other defendants' sentences range from 6 to 12 years in prison. One of them was also fined $75,000. 4 of the defendants must also begin their prison terms today. The other 10 must report to jail September 13th. Several family members were in the courtroom during sentencing. Most of the defendants' wives cried openly when Judge Hobbs sentenced their husbands. He told the family, "This is sort of an American tragedy." The judge says the profits coming in were a tremendous temptation. Judge Hobbs says, unless the trafficking is stopped, we're in terrible shape in this country.
Federal prosecutors called the judge's decision fair. As one observer said upon leaving the courtroom, the judge did what he had to do. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News at the federal courthouse.
Attorneys for 2 liquor store employees and the State Employees Association say that Alcoholic Beverage Control Board Administrator Joe Broadwater had no authority to order the layoffs because he cannot hold 2 state jobs at the same time. Broadwater admits he works in the state finance office in addition to his other duties. Those same attorneys also say the layoffs were not in good faith and according to procedures of the state personnel department. In response, attorneys for the state ABC board say the complaint about Broadwater holding 2 jobs isn't in proper form for the court to consider, and that before an action can be filed in circuit court objecting to a personnel action, all the administrative procedures of the state personnel board must be first exhausted. Circuit Judge Perry Hooper reserved his ruling on the motion to dismiss and asked the attorneys for the employees to call witnesses to support their claims. Because of the large number of witnesses called, Judge Hooper is expected to continue the hearing tomorrow. At that time, he may temporarily stop the layoffs in order to conduct yet another hearing into the matter. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
Miss Wheelchair Alabama, now Miss Wheelchair America 1983, was met by her husband, one of her children, and a whole lot of friends. Mrs. Crozier captured the national title in Columbus, Ohio, Saturday after competing with 13 other state winners who were judged on their personality, appearance, and personal accomplishments. Returning to Montgomery today, Mrs. Crozier was honored for her latest accomplishment by representatives of the governor and the mayor, among others.
What it's all about is getting the word out to everyone that handicapped people have dignity, worth, accomplishments, and value. That we do have some problems, mobility problems, attitudinal barriers, and architectural barriers. But if we don't get the word out to John Q. Public, then those barriers will never be removed.
Mrs. Crozier has worked a variety of jobs and earned a bachelor's degree in English, and she has plans for a master's degree. Mrs. Crozier was left partially paralyzed by polio as a child, and though it may have slowed her down a bit, it never stopped her. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Before daylight, these strikers were on the picket line outside Alabama Power's 5th Street warehouse. Inside, their supervisors were readying for a day's work. Non-union members have been put on 12-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week shifts to make up for the walkout. Of the company's 9,600 employees, 3,900 are represented by the union.
And everybody will be working 10 or 12 hours. They will be working as long as it takes to get the job done. And some other jobs will not be filled while the special assignment people are doing some union jobs.
IBEW's attorney Charles Boyd of Gadsden says as it stands now, the contract is unacceptable. He says the utility could settle the matter without costing the consumer another penny. But Boyd says the company doesn't seem to want to do that. In the meantime, Mr. Allen says there's been no word on when negotiations will begin again, but he says he hopes they can settle soon because the union workers are needed back on the job. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Councilman Mark Gilmore started things off as the council took up the budget question. He proposed an amendment giving the Montgomery Community Action Agency $20,000. That passed with little trouble. But when Councilman Donald Watkins proposed an amendment to set up an indigent health care program in the city, the fight was on. Mr. Watkins asked the council for just more than $200,000 for the program. He proposed that half the money come from the city's emergency health care fund. But Mayor Emery Fulmer strongly suggested the council not tamper with the emergency health care funds, saying they could hurt a good working medical emergency program. The mayor called a health care program for indigents a bottomless pit.
If you start it, you better be prepared to fund it from now on in ever increasing amounts of money.
Other council members then jumped on the Watkins amendment, asking why Mr. Watkins didn't attend budget hearings earlier in the year and saying an indigent health care program should be voted on by the whole city. Mr. Watkins said, quote, "If you don't want to support it, just say I don't believe in giving poor people health care." The request for an indigent health care program came from officials of the Fairview Medical Center, and it's been before the council for several weeks. After much more debate, Councilman Watkins said it was time to either vote the amendment up or down. It was 6-3. They voted it down, and the new budget was approved. Reporting from City Hall, Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Attorneys for 2 liquor store employees and the Alabama State Employees Association are challenging the validity of the layoff order. The attorneys believe Alcoholic Beverage Control Board Administrator Joe Broadwater vacated his office when he went to work in the State Finance Department and therefore didn't have authority to issue the layoff order. The employees' attorneys also charged the layoffs weren't in good faith and were an attempt to hinder the state liquor stores and help the private liquor industry. Attorneys for the state ABC board moved to dismiss the motion to temporarily stop the layoffs, saying the issues raised were not raised in proper form. ABC board attorneys say before a personnel action can be taken to circuit court, the grievance procedures of the state personnel department must be used. Circuit Judge Perry Hooper didn't rule on the dismissal motion and asked for witnesses to be called. On the stand, ABC Administrator Joe Broadwater said the layoffs had been planned since March because the employees just weren't needed. More witnesses will be heard tomorrow. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
media event. What it's all about is getting the word out to everyone that handicapped people have dignity, worth, accomplishments, and value. That we do have some problems, mobility problems, attitudinal barriers, and architectural barriers. But if we don't get the word out to John Q. Public, then those barriers will never be removed. That's what I'm about. It's going to be often. I hope you'll see me.
That's that side gate up there. It's going up there.
We would like to get back and start negotiating and get these people back to work because we need them back and we want them back.
Last year in the season opener in this brand new stadium, the Vanderbilt Commodores came from behind to beat heavily favored Maryland 21-17. The players, after returning to the dressing room, had to put their jerseys back on and come out to take a curtain call. The 41,000 fans just wouldn't leave. That early season high carried through a 4-win season. Now, that may not seem too impressive to some, but it's been 6 years since Vanderbilt won more than 2 games in a season. Although the schedule is tough, Vandy could send their newfound fans into orbit this year with a winning season. If that happens, they will do it with the pass. Whit Taylor is the most prolific thrower in the conference. Coach George McIntyre's grand design to recruit the nation for good athletes of higher than normal academic standards is beginning to pay off. A winning season for Vandy would not only thrill the long-suffering Commodore faithful, but it would be good for the concept of athletics with academics. Stop number 5 on the SEC Skyriders Tour from Nashville, Tennessee. This is Phil Snow reporting. Life without Buck is a new experience for the Georgia Dogs. Buck Bellew, the SEC's Athlete of the Year last year, has graduated on to professional baseball. The quarterback job falls to another Valdosta High School product named John Lastinger. Georgia was prepared for Buck's departure. There are few who fear that Lastinger can't do the job, but no one was ready for Herschel Walker's broken thumb. Vince Dooley, always cool and collected, admits to some shock when he finally realized his tailback was not indestructible. Herschel says he'll play again. Dooley says he'll be fortunate to make the Brigham Young game a week into the season. While Georgia's graduation losses were small in number, they were large in ability. Bellew, Game Breaker, Lindsey Scott, Eddie Meat Cleaver Weaver, and several others are gone. So why do you say Georgia is still favored to win or share a 3rd straight Southeastern Conference title? Well, try these reasons. Herschel Walker and Georgia's perennially excellent recruiting, and, of course, Vince Dooley. He's a coach. Stop number 6 on the SEC Skyriders Tour. This is Phil Snow reporting from Athens, Georgia.
Kay Ivey was the first candidate to officially announce her plans to run for the office. This is her first political venture, and she has several objectives on the state auditor's drawing board should she be elected. Ms. Ivey's major goal is to follow her campaign slogan, being accountable to the taxpayers. That includes making a report to the taxpayers, letting them know how their money is being spent. She also wants to work closer with the Office of Examiners of Public Accounts. About 2 weeks after Ms. Ivey announced, Jan Cook officially kicked off her campaign. Ms. Cook says the first thing she'll do if elected is audit her own office. At 26, she's the youngest of the candidates, but Ms. Cook says she doesn't believe her age will hinder her campaign. Ms. Cook is from Dozier and is a member of the City Council. Linda Grambley stepped down from her job as executive assistant to the state auditor to run for her boss's position. Ms. Grambley says she planned early to run for the job and decided officially to enter the race last fall. She's campaigning on her 20 years experience in private industry and in state government, where she also served in former Governor George Wallace's administration. Ms. Grambley says she wants to serve the people and be sensitive to their needs. The fourth candidate in the race, Gladys Detheridge, has a similar campaign philosophy. She believes there's a need for what she calls dedicated, concerned, and caring people in state government. Ms. Detheridge says there are three major issues in the race: making the office more accountable, not only when it comes to balancing the books, but also to the taxpayers, to let them know how their $7.5 billion is being spent. She also plans to appoint what she calls dedicated people to the Board of Registrars. Lastly, Ms. Detheridge says the office must be independent, free from political ties with agencies being audited, including state departments and Alabama banks. If elected, Ms. Detheridge says she'll work to keep the record straight. Kim Davis, WSFA TV News.
Don Siegelman has been campaigning for a second term with the slogan, "A Working Secretary of State." Sometimes the work he wanted to do on election law reform led to battles with the legislature. But Siegelman says he's effected changes that have made Alabamians better informed and more able to participate in government. He counts among his victories longer voting hours, simplified absentee voting for handicapped persons, and programs to increase voter registration. If given another 4 years in office, Siegelman says he'll keep pushing for a statewide voter file maintenance system to keep voter lists clean, and for tougher laws on campaign financial disclosure. When Betty Frink started running for Secretary of State, she didn't think there were too many campaign issues. Now she says she's learned differently. Frink says she's discovered a lot of people are dissatisfied with the way Siegelman has been doing his job. According to Frink, Siegelman has used the office to promote himself and his political ambitions. Frink says if elected, she won't hold unnecessary workshops around the state or focus on one special interest like election reform. Frink is in her second consecutive term as state auditor. She once served as Secretary of State 24 years ago. And if elected this time, Frink says her first priority would be to cut waste and unnecessary spending. Susan Silvernail, WSFA TV News.
Another problem that we've had, the time is coming, Alabama, when we must be thinking about jobs. In my opinion, Bill Edwards' ultra-liberal, extremely socialist ideas are completely out of line with 99.9% of the Alabamians. In my opinion, Alabama is not ready for his type theories, his beliefs. The time is coming, Alabama, when we must be thinking about jobs.
September the 3rd, and I expect Mr. Creel to have to own. I got him particularly for. By filing such suit, Mr. Creel has put his own character and reputation and past activities into issue. And I intend to make certain that such matters are fully explored and decided by a jury of his peers before the suit is all over. I have nothing to hide, and it will be Mr. Creel's actions, not mine, which will be the focus of any litigation. A jury of his peers before the suit is all over. I have nothing to hide, and it will be Mr. Creel's actions, not mine.
We are going to discontinue the use of the card, although we think it was a very clever idea. We think that it did for us what we wanted it to do. It gave us a name recognition that we so desperately needed. It was unique. Registered male, ask him to is guilty or not guilty, is afraid to come to a microphone, being a puppet of the special interest groups down here. The trial we are now leading, rather than sitting in an air-conditioning law office and refusing to answer any issues, we have been to every county in this state. We have talked to people throughout this state. My son, currently today, is crisscrossing North Alabama with his caravan.
Of various crimes that we hadn't served on him yet. He pulled out a revolver and shot her one time in the face with a .38. She left out of the house and tried to run across the street for some help, and he followed her and shot her again, and she fell in the street. She's at Jackson's Hospital now under guarded condition. To contact us or call the secret witness number 262-4000. They've had some other trouble there. He's all.
Qualification. The spokesman for the group, Attorney John Falkenberry of Birmingham, said Ziegler is ahead in some political polls, but if Ziegler is elected, it will be a tragedy.
I believe that the mere fact that somebody's name is well known does not qualify him to sit on this court or on any other court, particularly when a man is or a woman is plainly unqualified to hold that position as Mr. Ziegler is.
But Ziegler says he is qualified, and he knows why the lawyers oppose him.
It's because I will be a Supreme Court judge for all of the people and not just for the big-time lawyers. The reason
Ziegler
for this
says the
news
lawyers
conference
made
today
a deal
is
with the
quite
Alabama
simple.
Democratic
All of the
Conference to
polls,
support one of Ziegler's opponents, Oscar Adams, in exchange for ADC support on some legislation earlier this year. That prompted ADC State Chairman Joe Reed to ask Ziegler if he too didn't try to strike a deal with the ADC.
That you would run against Judge Maddox. If we agreed in advance to support you against Maddox, that you would not run for place number 3, didn't you do it?
Yes, I did.
Okay, then.
Nevertheless, Ziegler calls the whole affair a battle between the people and special interest. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
If y'all would agree to support me in advance.
Back and forth between
the lawyers were led by Attorney John Falkenberry of Birmingham, who says Ziegler just isn't qualified to do the job.
He doesn't have the experience necessary to sit on this court. He's been licensed to practice law for barely 5 years. He's only been engaged in the practice of law for 3 years.
The lawyers were also critical of the way Ziegler conducts his public life, and they say if he's elected, it will be a travesty of justice. But Ziegler says the lawyers don't know what they're talking about, that they didn't do their homework. He says experience in private practice and with the State Public Service Commission leaves him well qualified for the court.
This is a last-minute desperation attempt to keep Jim Ziegler from winning the race on September 7th so that these high-powered lawyers will have 3 more weeks to do their dirty work.
Ziegler accused the lawyers of striking deals with the Alabama Democratic Conference to keep him out of office. But ADC State Chairman Joe Reed says Ziegler tried to strike some deals of his own.
That you would run against Judge Maddox. If we agreed in advance to support you against Maddox, that you would not run for place number 3, didn't you do it?
Yes, I did.
Okay, then.
Ziegler says he hopes the lawyers will continue their attacks. He thinks his fights against them will actually make him more popular. Tom Foreman, WSFA TV News.
Judge Hooper is being asked by 2 state liquor store employees and the State Employees Association to stop the layoffs and to decide if the layoff order was even valid, since they say Alcoholic Beverage Control Board Administrator Joe Broadwater is holding 2 state jobs. Deputy ABC Board Administrator Jenny Lazenby testified that the reduction in the workforce is the best move the board can make. She says recent studies show some state liquor stores are doing the same amount of business as other stores, but with half the employees. State Personnel Department officials told the judge that the ABC board had followed all the necessary procedures to lay off the workers and that none of the affected liquor store employees had officially requested a review of the ABC action. Judge Perry Hooper says he delayed his decision on an injunction because it appears no ABC employees will be terminated until September 30th, and he says he'll need time to study the two issues brought before him. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
Bill Baxley isn't a newcomer to Alabama politics. At the age of 41, he's a seasoned veteran. For the last 13 years, he's either held an elected office or has been running for one. Baxley began his political career as a district attorney for Houston and Henry counties in 1966. 4 years later, he ran for and was elected state attorney general. At the time, he was the youngest attorney general in the nation. Baxley held the AG's post for 8 years until he sought the Democratic nomination for governor. Baxley made the runoffs in the 1978 election, only to be defeated by then political newcomer Fob James. Although Baxley returned to private law practice, he still captured headlines, most recently his successful defense of Houston County Sheriff A.B. Clark earlier this year. Baxley says there's only one issue in the lieutenant governor's race, that is, changing the Alabama legislature. He says the Alabama legislative system is the worst in the nation and hasn't worked in decades. Throughout the campaign, Baxley has been criticized for not talking about other issues. He says the lieutenant governor must be impartial. Once he starts taking sides, he'll lose the lawmakers' respect and not be able to control the Senate. Baxley also says when the lieutenant governor starts giving his views, it will lead to conflicts with the governor. Baxley says if elected, he'll work with the governor to resolve the problems of the state, but he says he won't serve as a floor leader for the governor. He'll just make sure his programs get a fair hearing in the Senate. Don Phelps, WSFA TV News.
Judge Davis? It's been a real pleasant association. We always had a lot of fun together, and a lot of picking with each other. Everybody else has been done too. That's the way his look. Badge that you carried for so many years. You fell in this, you and your family both. On all men by these presidents that E.R. True Sr., better known as Ivy Poop, has given the attached $5 bill in U.S. currency to the M.E. Beetle Bailey retirement.
Now with the people during this last 2 or 3 days, and once again telling them the basic difference between here today, I would have all their support, but I have not been their puppet. As a result, debate request, we have repeatedly, publicly, and by registered mail asked him to debate someone who got his education driving a truck. So I'm very disappointed that he has refused to face the issues. And therefore, we are going on a statewide radio broadcast tomorrow morning beginning at stand on any issues. I've not been a puppet of the special interest groups down here, or Birmingham or wherever he's from, rather than sitting in an air-conditioning law office and refusing to answer any issues. We have been to every county in this state.
Senator Callahan's campaign can be called anything but subdued, as evidenced here in this commercial. His ads have been takeoffs of American Express commercials, but Callahan says they've been successful, giving him the name recognition he needed. Senator Callahan has been a part of the Alabama legislature for 12 years, and the senator says that experience qualifies him to deal effectively with issues that may come up in the Senate, and it gives him an edge on working with the lawmakers because he already knows them. Aside from his legislative experience, Callahan says he understands the working man because he is one. After serving in the Navy, Callahan got a job driving a truck, and now he's chairman of the Mobile-based trucking company. Callahan says because he's a businessman, he has better insight into the problems of Alabamians than a trial lawyer does. Senator Callahan says the most important qualification for the lieutenant governor is experience. And he says one of the most important issues that will face the legislature in coming years is how to attract new industry to Alabama. Callahan says, unlike his opponent, he's not afraid to state his opinion on important matters like prayer in school or the right to work law. He says even though his most important role as lieutenant governor will be as an arbitrator, he'll still have to vote in case of a tie. And he says the people of Alabama need to know where candidates stand on each of the issues. Gina Gregory, WSFA TV News.
Is afraid to come to a microphone and to debate.
When John Majors came home to Tennessee, the fans here were wildly ecstatic.
But we're overrunning about 80% on outside plays more than underrunning guys. Reggie?
Prepared to accept an 8-4 season such as last year as a good one. Majors is different. The brash confidence that national championship at Pitt brought has been replaced by a maturity, a realism that the old glory days may never really return. Majors is saying this year's team could be the best he's had at Tennessee, but in my opinion, the Vols still haven't solved two nagging problems: a winning quarterback and a physical defense. Alan Cockrell, the promising freshman who went down against Auburn last year, is the front runner at quarterback, but his badly damaged knee surely will slow him a bit, and he didn't appear that fast to begin with. Still, he's the only experienced quarterback that Tennessee has. On the other hand, the Vols have one of the league's most favorable schedules. Only Auburn and Alabama appear troublesome. So, an 8 or perhaps a 9-win season for Tennessee is very likely. This is stop number 7 on the SEC Skywriters Tour. Phil Snow reporting. Jerry Claiborne is the only new coach we've greeted on the Skywriters Tour this year. You'll recall the turbulence of recent years here at Kentucky, the firing of Coach Fran Kersey and the hiring of Jerry Claiborne away from Maryland. Normally in a case such as this, the new man finds few players, and the Kentucky situation looks very normal. With a tough schedule, which includes Oklahoma, Clemson, Auburn, Georgia, Florida, and Tennessee, the immediate future is bleak. Probably what Claiborne is most interested in this year is establishing credibility. He very much wants to show the Kentucky fans that his players are good citizens. There have been far too many scrapes with the law here in recent years. Claiborne is a hometown boy. He played and coached under Bear Bryant here. Being one of their own, the Kentucky fans will allow Claiborne to build slowly. His 20-year record as a head coach is impressive, so all in all, it looks like Kentucky football is